Good morning, everyone. Wait a few moments, make sure everybody's able to log in successfully here. Well, hopefully your team won last night. If not, hopefully you won in the kitchen and had some delicious snacks. Our morning is been off to the races already here in the IT world. Things are fast, so we're glad that you guys can make it to our talk this morning about cybersecurity threats and how to protect your IT during COVID. If you're just joining us for the first time for one of these talks, my name is Luke Barton. I'm the Business Development Director here for 360 IT Partners. And this morning we have the pleasure of Mr. Justin Carter, who is one of our partners and our Chief Technology Officer. So Justin, as the wizard behind the curtain, as it were, when it comes to cybersecurity for our organization and our clients that we serve. Just a little bit of background on him. He's been doing IT for some time. He affectionately says since he could chew on a network cable, he has been messing with it. And what that really means is it's been a lifestyle for him. So he's lived and breathed IT and security and seen it change throughout the years, and has a deep understanding and very intimate knowledge when it comes to security. It's a passion, a core passion of his. And so he's going to be leading most of the talk today, but just wanted to give you a little bit of a background on him and preface for what he does for our organization. And then a little bit about who we are. 360 IT has been here in the Hampton Roads area serving for just over 25 years. We've got a team of about 50 folks and growing now. And, basically a small business looks to somebody like us to lead and guide their technology decision-making, support their environment, and make sure that they're secure. So that's a little bit about who we are and how we operate. So onto the fun stuff today, jumping into security and cybersecurity threats, and especially during COVID, we've seen an unreal spike through this time. And so I won't take much thunder from Justin, but you guys are in for a treat. So here we go.
All right. Thank you, Luke. I want to start by going over some key terms. We're going to be talking about a lot today, and a lot of these terms, I can sometimes take for granted that everybody understands. So I just want to go over some basic things that we're going to be talking about. So social engineering, everybody's probably heard this, but essentially social engineering is the ability for somebody to get manipulated into giving them their password. Somebody calls and pretends to be someone, emails in pretending to be someone else, saying that they need to update a check or they need to update the routing information on payroll. Social engineering is the use of deception to manipulate individuals into divulging confidential or personal information that may be used for nefarious or fraudulent purposes. Phishing. Phishing is a type of social engineering attack that involves email communication. So phishing specifically is via email. You probably received 1,000 phishing emails in your inboxes, and it's basically somebody trying to impersonate someone else, or essentially trick you into giving up a password, or trick you into doing something that they want you to do, through your email. And then spear phishing. Spear phishing is when you're targeted specifically. Oftentimes these attackers are going after the CEO, the finance people. They can get this information from LinkedIn, they can get this information from other social media networks, but spear phishing is a specifically targeted social engineering campaign that's targeted at a specific individual within an organization. And then next we have multi-factor authentication. Now this is a big topic, and we're going to get into it a little bit later in our in the presentation, but it's basically an authentication method that requires the use of one or more verification methods at your login. You probably have something like this with your banking account. When you log into your bank and you get sent a text message and you have to enter in a code, that's a form of multi-factor authentication. Clickjacking. Clickjacking is essentially when someone fakes a pop-up and they're trying to trick you into clicking on something. So maybe they have a pop-up on your screen that looks like an exit button. This is a common one that we see, and that exit button is actually an OK button disguised as an exit button. And so clickjacking is essentially somebody faking a pop-up or faking a notification get you to click on something that is not right. Ransomware. Ransomware is a form of malware, which we'll get into here in a second. But ransomware seeks to encrypt your data or otherwise hold that data for ransom. This can happen through, clicking a link in an email, through clickjacking. You get some ransomware installed on the computer, your files get encrypted, and then, an attacker is looking for money to decrypt your data. And then malware is kind of a generalized term that means anything. That means anything. That means anything that's a nefarious software. Viruses, worms. I mean, you've all heard this term. Malware is kind of an all-encompassing term that refers to all kinds of bad software, from marketing software that's seeking to track where you're going on the internet, to ransomware and viruses and things like that. So it's kind of a more generalized term.
And as we move forward through the presentation, I dropped it in the chat. But if you've got questions that pop up, there are no dumb questions or silly questions when it comes to security. All questions are valid, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the time here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Luke. So what's at stake? What are these attackers looking for? I mean, of course, the first most obvious one is financial gain, or in our case, financial loss. They're looking to benefit from our finances, or us tricking us into doing something. This can come from stolen credit card numbers, fines due to non-compliance with things like HIPAA or other regulatory mandates. DoD has DFARS, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. Also they can hijack your payroll or accounting information, and they can also, hold your data for ransom, as we were just talking about. So those are all examples of, financial loss being something that they're targeting. Reputational equity. Now, this can't be understated. If you're in the medical field or you're doing business with the DoD, there's disclosure laws. If you have a security incident, you are required under law to disclose that you had a security breach. What could that do to your reputation? Could it cause your clients to lose confidence in you? Could it cause you to lose a key contract, or to not even be able to bid on a contract, in the future? And now this is a big one, time and inconvenience. And I think about this one a lot. What's your time really worth? I try to put a lot of emphasis on this in my own life and what I dedicate my time to. But if you consider, time is the ultimate equalizer for all of us. It's the one thing that we can't make any more of. And so I try to really tightly control my time. So loss of time and inconvenience to you is actually a huge cost, especially if you're an executive or you're a key player within your organization. That's an even bigger impact if it's, if this attack is affecting you. Loss of information. This could be trade secrets. This could be intellectual property. This could be, personal information. Maybe it's your photos from your iCloud account, or it's data off your desktop. Stolen information, loss of information is definitely something that these attackers are looking to do, is steal your personal information. Business interruption. Roughly, if a company is doing $1 million of annualized revenue, that's roughly $480 per business hour for you to be down.
Free tax.
Love that. And so. It costs you real money to be interrupted. Maybe you have a particular piece of equipment that manufactures widgets for you, and if that equipment goes down, your business is interrupted. You can't now deliver to your customer, and then that goes back to reputational equity. If you're not able to deliver the products to your customer, that affects your reputation. And then finally, downstream effects to friends, family, and colleagues. Oftentimes, what we see in these attacks are, when an email account becomes compromised, the attacker will, use that person's email to pivot into someone else. Like, let's say you have another business colleague, somebody that you're always emailing. They can then start to send emails as you. With links in them. I've seen some really clever ones where they're using the person's signature, and it looks exactly like the other person's email, except that it contains some kind of link that says click this. And of course, somebody's more apt to click on it because they trust the person that's sending them the email. And so this is this is a way that you can then affect other downstream companies and colleagues. We see that kind of thing all the time, where somebody gets attacked, an email gets sent out to to a vendor or to a customer that they automatically trust, and they follow those instructions. Why are you a target? And these figures come from Verizon's 2019 data breach investigative report. But executives are being targeted as they're seen as easier targets with access to more within their organization. A busy and perhaps distracted executive may be more likely to click on something, maybe even more likely to reuse a password at various sites, because again, these executives, they have access to more. They're typically doing more, and they have access and passwords and all of that at a high level to the company. So it makes sense that an attacker would target that sort of an individual within an organization. We recently had a customer that got socially engineered. An attacker called up, was able to convince somebody to go to a particular link. Their computer and credentials to their email get compromised, and then the attacker just sits and waits, and will monitor that email traffic and understand the invoice numbers, understand who the vendors of that particular account are, and then we'll use COVID and say, hey, once they've intercepted an invoice number, they'll then impersonate the user and call the vendor and say, hey, we're no longer accepting paper checks due to COVID. Can you update our ACH information to this? And of course, that would be the attacker's bank account. Now the money is going from the vendor to the attacker, and if it's overseas, it's very difficult to get those ACHs and wire transfers reversed. And so there's an example of, like, we can have all the best security measures in place, but if somebody can be tricked into giving up their password, a lot of those security measures are rendered ineffective because of that.
That actually kind of ties back to something from our last talk, talking about some of the things that you do around password policies and things like that. And we'll sometimes refer to security as being an inconvenience, but it's only an inconvenience until it isn't. So in those examples that Justin was just giving, having some technical things in place are important in terms of password policies and maybe like account lockout policies. But there's also business procedural things that you need to have in place and be thinking about. So for example, in your finance department, do you have protocol for whenever a downstream customer or somebody that you exchanged money with changes payment method or asks for you to change payment method? Implement a verbal confirmation process whereby that person is to call that vendor and confirm that that was them sending an email asking for a change in payment. And the reason for that is what Justin just explained, is that socially engineered trick where they get you to send money to the wrong place using empathy, social circumstances like COVID to trick you into doing something detrimental to the business. So implement those human elements as well. Make sure that there's conversation around those changes to ensure that you don't become a victim, because be sure that they are just that sneaky and just that convincing.
And they absolutely are. And I really like that, Luke. Really, security within your organization starts with awareness. Mm-hmm. And so that's, obviously why we're here today, is to make you aware of some of these things and bring that to top of mind. But often security within an organization is a culture, that leadership, should be creating a security awareness culture within an organization. If somebody's calling to change payroll direct deposit information, that should raise a red flag, and have some checks and balances behind it to make sure that, this is a legitimate request. Again, compliance and security is not really just an IT thing. It's a leadership thing. It's a cultural thing within an organization, and security awareness is a big part of that. And it takes an ongoing effort. It's not something that you just do once and you're done. It's security and compliance is an ongoing, effort within an organization.
What was the analogy the other day that came up? We were talking about, vaccines, and how initially it was a vaccine for this, issue, and now it is a vaccine for next year's issue and the year after that, and that's because the issues change. So what we developed to protect against in current state, we expect that to change in the future. Therefore, you have to continually update your security measures. Obviously, the health example is just an analogy, but in security, it's the same thing. It's not a George Foreman. You can't set it and forget it. It's got to stay top of mind, be part of continual conversation. And if it's not, back to those first couple slides, about what's at stake. Think about the things that are at stake, bring those topics up in conversation at the appropriate times, and get security in the organization elevated in the conversation, and make sure that it's being addressed.
So the basics, right? And most security incidents occur because an organization is really lacking the basics. So I figured this was a great place to start. And some of this stuff might seem obvious, and some of it might not. So let's dig into this. So again, as I said earlier, if a user can be tricked into giving up their password, many of the other protections that are conventional, like antivirus software and security measures on your computer, are going to be rendered much less effective. Because they're basically walking in the proverbial front door, using your password, and they can impersonate you and do everything that you have access to, can do anything that you have access to, can access anything that you have access to. So use a complex and unique password everywhere. We're going to dig into passwords here in a later slide, but having a unique password that you're not reusing everywhere, and something that's complex, something that's not dictionary based. We'll get into passphrases a little bit later on. I'm a big proponent of passphrases versus passwords. Don't click on stuff. I think this is one that is another obvious one, but there's a lot of trickery out there with this clickjacking techniques that I was talking about earlier. Just be careful what you're clicking on. If it doesn't look right, if something seems off about it, if you're getting a pop-up at an odd time that's requesting something, saying that you have a virus or you need to call a particular number, that's almost none of that. I mean, I've never seen an actual legit vendor that says, hey, there's an issue, call me. That doesn't usually happen.
Yeah, you've not been randomly selected to win a car. You're not randomly about to get a free vacation. Like, those things just don't happen in the real world. So when it seems too good to be true, it is. And yes, curiosity most of the time does kill the cat. So just to reinforce that, it's a basic statement, but if you're not expecting it, if you didn't ask for it, don't click on it.
Absolutely. And you know what? The corollary there is, if it's free, you're the product.
What does that mean, though?
But what it really means is they're making money off of you somehow. Nothing's free. Most people aren't out there, especially on the internet, to do things out of the kindness of their heart. If it's free, if there's, you're the product. They're getting something out of it. Whether it's tracking your usage of something, like collecting marketing and demographic data. If it's free, you're the product. Like, I see a lot of people downloading a lot of freeware, a lot of free software on the internet. That free software comes at a cost, and it might not be a monetary cost, but it's a privacy cost. If it's free, you're the product. There's something about it that they're making money off of. Use common sense. I think that all the things that we talked about here are kind of common sense related. So just think about it, stop, think, wait to click. If you're not expecting that email, just use some common sense and don't click on that email. Educate yourself. Well, the good news is that you're here, right? So you're already educating yourself, and that's really the first step: security awareness. And then lastly, another kind of obvious one is update your software. We're all kind of plagued at times with pop-up notifications about updating Windows, but there's a reason for this, and the reason is that out-of-date software is more vulnerable. A lot of the ransomware gets onto your computer through exploiting some kind of a hole in the operating system, a vulnerability in your Office software, a vulnerability in your mail client. And so when you do click on a link, you have more, if you were to click on a malicious link, you have more chance of that malicious software not being able to infect your computer if your software is up to date. So keep your software up to date. That's really a good basic pro tip.
We see a lot of folks, security is an inconvenience. I've said this multiple times. I'll probably continue to say it until it's not. So a good way to think of that would be, updating your software. If you came home and one of your windows was missing out of your house, how quickly would that get your attention and be dealt with? Immediately, because there's immediate impact. But it's easy to just, minimize a thing reminding you to change your password, minimize a thing telling you that your software needs to be updated because it's inconvenient. Stop pestering me. But then all of a sudden, if something does happen, you wish you could go back in time and take that moment and value it and give the security the attention that it needs. So next time you get one of those things that comes to mind of like, hey, I should be, I remember my bank login asking me to enable two-factor authentication. I probably should take the time and do it, because there's no time like the present. And if that unfortunate incident does happen, regret is a difficult emotion to process. So take the time, do the updates anywhere that you can in your life, enable two-factor authentication, speak with your parents, help them enable those things. I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but the elderly are a very hot target when it comes to the financial losses. So talk about two-factor, update your passwords. It's worth it.
Yeah, and we'll dig in a little bit more to multi-factor authentication here shortly. The not so basics. Multi-factor authentication, it can be a challenging topic. We'll dig a lot deeper into that here shortly. Encryption, it's a best practice to send sensitive information in an encrypted fashion. It's possible to encrypt your phone or your laptop so that either is lost, the information contained isn't accessible. You lose your phone, any photos on your phone, any contacts on your phone, any information on your phone can be encrypted so that an attacker, a would-be attacker, can't get to that information by plugging your phone in and pulling the information down onto a machine. You can do the same thing with your laptop. If you have a laptop, encryption is a required standard for certain certain regulatory things like the Healthcare Information Privacy and Protection Act, Healthcare Information Privacy and Portability Act. And so encryption is a big part of securing your data. VPN. A VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. I'll bet most of you are familiar with this. It's a technology that allows you to route your connections through a secure tunnel so that information is encrypted. Again, this is it's a form of encryption. It encrypts the network traffic. Anything that goes in and out between the organization that you're VPNing to and yourself is secured. Whether you're sitting at Starbucks, whether you're in another country, it enables you to route your data in a secure fashion to a destination such as a corporate office, such as a server in the cloud. There's many use cases for VPNs, but we've been setting up for companies that didn't have VPNs already established. When COVID came along, we were hot and heavy getting VPNs set up for everyone so that they could work remotely, effectively, and efficiently.
An easy way to conceptualize VPN is just imagine if your office is, in the middle of town center, Virginia Beach, and you live off Military Highway. Picture extending an Ethernet cable from your office 15 miles down the road and plugging it right into your laptop. That is basically what a VPN does, is it virtually extends that secure office network all the way to wherever you are across the public internet, so that all of your interactions that are work related are happening in a completely private HOV lane, if you will, just between you and your office. And that way there's no chance that some outside entity or the provider of the Wi-Fi you're using has a way to access that very sensitive business information when you're working remotely.
Absolutely. So that's the not so basics. I want to get back to passwords, because this is probably the single biggest pro tip, is to have a good password. And I want to implore you to forget password. The word password is not a great, think passphrase. In the computer world, your password isn't your password. The computer has a process of hashing whatever you use as your password and turns that into, a hash, which is then actually your password. And so that's why the length of your password is, or your passphrase is important, because the longer the passphrase or password, the longer or larger the hash is for your password to the computer. And your brain doesn't remember random, things that you put together.
Like all the special characters and
right. Capital this and lowercase that and exclamation, like it doesn't remember that very well. But something like defeating 70 blue gorillas. You know, that's something that your brain's going to remember a lot easier than a bunch of random characters. A passphrase, you know, just you know, any simple phrase that could work. Eating 12 tacos, you know, exclamation mark. You know, these are simple things that your brain is able to remember more easily than, you know, random letters and numbers. You know, recently the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is used as the basis for many cybersecurity frameworks, changed their stance on forcing users to change their passwords. You know, in years past, you know, people would say, you know, go change your password every 90 days. Well, that leads to bad behavior, because, you know, what we find people do is they just use the same password and they add the letter 1 at the end of it, 2, 3, 4 every time they change it. So if, you know, again, that's a terrible security practice, because if that password does get compromised, it's easy to tell, you know, looking at the password, what the user is doing, and therefore derive what the passwords are to many other things. So it leads to poor end user behavior. It's still required by some standards, but some certain standards are still still catching up with these new recommendations of not changing your password, just having a really solid password that you maybe change once a year, because we all know how fun it is to go through and change all your passwords to everything. But if you just have, you know, a really good password that you're not reusing anywhere else, that is more effective than trying to change it and randomize it every time. Your brain doesn't remember these random things. So changing the password, just interesting that NIST has changed their stance on that.
Here's a good example of where forgetting your password and doing a passphrase would be beneficial. There's a story out there right now about, I don't know, $200 million worth of Bitcoin. I'm sure everybody's seen the craze over the cryptos right now, cryptocurrency in the stock exchange. Someone has forgotten their password to their secured hard drive, where their blockchain password is for their crypto, and there's like $200 million on there, and he's guessed incorrectly 8 times so far and has 9 total attempts before the drive fully encrypts and he can never get to it. So if that guy would have simply forgotten the passwords and moved to a passphrase, it would have achieved all the complexity he needs, and he might be $200 million richer. So think about that next time you do a password instead of a passphrase. Is it worth $200 million?
Probably.
Yeah.
So even the National Institute of Standards and Technology agrees that passwords suck. You know, the use of multi-factor authentication on top of your password augments the security of your password very significantly. Having one very strong passphrase and a password management software, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, is really ideal, and it's what I personally do. What is a password manager? So a password manager, you know, stores all your passwords in one place. It allows you quick access to your passwords. It can also, you know, as you've collected passwords for different services, it can also make sure that you're not reusing passwords, and that your password strength is up to date, is correct for all these services that you're using. It can also generate random secure passwords for you, and it can be accessed from anywhere. You know, there's an app on your phone for the particular system that I use, and I'll give you some examples later in this talk. You know, you can pull an app. So if I'm traveling, for example, and I need to log into Netflix, you know, somewhere as I'm in a hotel room, I will, you know, open up my phone, go to my password manager app, multi-factor authenticate to my password manager app, and then I can display my Netflix password and type it in to wherever I need to, you know, input it at. So I've got all my passwords with me at all times. Which is extremely useful. Mm-hmm. Some other ways that I use this are when I'm browsing the web, the password manager software that's installed on your computer will automatically fill the passwords in for you that you need. So you're remembering one master password and unlocking the password manager software. Then the password manager software is slipping in the other passwords for you. I use it personally to randomize every password for every service that I use. So I don't know my Netflix password. You know, I don't know what my Amazon password is. I don't know what any of these other passwords are. I use the password management software to slip those in for me when I need them. And it's become something that I can't live without, because, you know, as a technologist, I have a tremendous number of logins that I'm managing, and you know, in this modern age, everything has a login. I mean, your stamps.com, your Staples, Walmart, it seems like everywhere we shop, everywhere we go, they have a new login, a new way to manage coupons, a new app out there for it. And we all have lots of passwords out there, and having it, and just that sheer fact leads to people reusing passwords, which is it's a really bad practice. And to share another thing, like there's an attack called a password spraying attack. And basically if, like, let's say you've got a good password, but you're reusing it at your Walgreens account. Well, Walgreens gets compromised. Something happens within the Walgreens account. Now they know what your email address is and what a password that you use is. Password spraying is where they take that username and email combination and try it at many different services across the web. And if they get a hit, they can then log in and pivot from there to get to other things. And that's a password spraying attack.
So what Justin's saying is basically he's got one passphrase to remember, and then he uses two-factor authentication to authenticate to that password service, which is virtually impossible to beat. And then behind that, everything is taken care of by the password manager. And another way to think about the value of randomization instead of reuse, like what he was explaining, with that hub and spoke spraying attack, where they then go and use those credentials to try all the common banks out there, all the common investment accounts, all the places where there's going to be value in your life. Picture your house with many different rooms, and each room having a lock on it. And behind each door, you've placed a precious heirloom valuable, right? And each door has a key that fits it. If the front door is impenetrable because there's a two lock process, the passphrase and the multi-factor, they virtually can't get past that. But if that's not there, and it's just one key that fits that door, as well as all the doors in the house, you're extraordinarily vulnerable. But by having a different key to every door and that very difficult front door, all of your valuables are much more protected. So that's kind of the analogy you can take away to think about the value of having a passphrase behind multi-factor authentication and then randomized passwords.
Absolutely. And a password manager can make your life, a lot easier. We all have a lot of passwords to manage, as I mentioned. This really is convenient, and it's become something I can't live without. I mean, it's one of the first things I install on a new computer when I get one is my password manager software.
And I'll be the first to admit, every year when I go to do my taxes, I probably have to do the email password reset on property taxes and a number of other things. So now I'm even thinking, as we're having this conversation, that I can extend that service out to other areas and save myself the headache of those password reset moments.
Absolutely. Use a password manager. Great. And I'll give you some examples of some later in our talk. So what is multi-factor authentication? You'll hear it called 2FA, TFA, T-FA, 2SV or two-step verification. These are all forms of multi-factor authentication. Most of us are using it today. I mean, you go to the gas station and you put your card in the machine to get gas, and then it asks you for your zip code. It's wanting to make sure that your zip code matches your card. I mean, that's a form of multi-factor authentication. It's using more than one factor to authenticate you as being able to do what you're doing, whether it's a credit card transaction or a simple purchase, log into your bank account. We've all seen that. Somebody texts you a code. That is multi-factor authentication. There's lots of forms of multi-factor authentication. There's that's a huge topic. But multi-factor is just securing additionally your login. Now you've got to have something in your possession, like your phone or a token that you have on your key ring, to authenticate that you are who you say you are. You're not just using your password, you're using another form additionally to authenticate yourself as being authorized to get to that resource. But today we're going to be just sticking with the term MFA or multi-factor authentication, because that's kind of all encompassing. 2FA, MFA can be more than two, but 2FA is just two. So MFA, I think, to me, multi-factor authentication is the more appropriate, way to say it, because it's more all-encompassing. And it's really the number one thing, in my opinion, that can protect you against the most number of threats. It's highly, highly valuable. And, it's 80% of all breaches are caused by credential compromise. Somebody giving up their password, and this protects against that. in addition to, protecting against, social engineering, phishing, brute force attacks. If somebody's just randomly trying to guess your password and they finally get a hit, they still can't get in because they don't have the multi-factor source. Shoulder surfing, somebody looking over your shoulder and seeing you type in your password, or using a key logging software to log with the keystrokes that you're typing and capturing your password. This is another method that protects against that. Eavesdropping, somebody hearing your password, out loud, seeing it written down on a piece of paper. This protects you against somebody being able to log in with just your password. Credential stuffing, again, this is similar to what I was describing earlier, where, you get a downstream service that's compromised, they're then trying to use that credential in all the different services that might be registered to your name. And there's tools that attackers can automate that. It's not that they're not manually going in and trying to log into everything. There's tools out there. They can just plug one username, one password in and say go, and that's going to try, hundreds of different social media sites, different logins, all the known stuff that's out there. And if they get a hit, then they can again pivot from there.
And whether you realize it or not, you've been experiencing multi-factor authentication since birth. During your childhood, whenever you asked your dad for something, before you got yes, he would go and ask your mom. Multi-factor.
That's good. Yeah, so MFA is hugely valuable, and I believe it is the single thing that you can do that will protect you against the most common attacks. This is a it's table stakes right now in security. Almost every compliance framework that exists right now has a multi-factor authentication component to it.
It's probably the number one way to stop yourself from being a random victim. And by random, I mean pomp and circumstance of an accidental click. Because in the situation where you've got multi-factor enabled, you could accidentally give up your password. You could accidentally click the wrong thing. But when they do go to attempt and get in using that credential, they're not going to have your cell phone or whatever you're using for multi-factor. They're not going to be able to do that second step to actually get into your account. And in those cases, you're probably going to get that email or notification saying, hey, was this you trying to log in? And you're going to know that you were protected because you had MFA enabled.
Another thing is that, Luke was saying earlier, security is rarely convenient. And unfortunately, multi-factor does add another step, for us to be able to get into our machine. And, it's always a challenge for us when we're implementing multi-factor authentication for a new organization. I talked earlier about security being a part of the culture. It's important when implementing this, at a company that that we communicate to the end users that their experience is going to change, and that what to expect, setting those expectations, and helping them to understand what the why is behind it.
Yes.
We don't want the villagers at the IT department's door with pitchforks and torches. Education is a huge component of a successful implementation of multi-factor authentication, within a corporate environment, because it does change your day-to-day use experience.
Mm-hmm. Tie it back to what's at stake. There was a slide earlier about, what's at stake, and the number one thing, obviously, financial losses behind that, time and headache. So tying that why for the change back to what's at stake will help the level of embrace for the change that is to come.
Absolutely. So I just kind of want to summarize what we've talked about. Here are the things that you can do to immediately protect yourself. Take stock of all your logins. Install a password management software. Start to pull in all of your logins, your stock trading account, your bank accounts, your stamps.com account, your Staples, your Walmart. Get it all pulled in, and use multi-factor authentication for your password manager software. We'll get into, again, some examples here shortly, but I mean, this one step, just taking an account of all of your things that are out there and databasing them into a password manager software is going to take your security up many layers. And this is something, I'm like the designated, as you might imagine, IT person for my family. And so, anytime people are talking to me about things that they can do to secure themselves, they raise their concerns to me about cybersecurity, I always point them in the direction of a password manager software. and using then multi-factor authentication with that password manager software. I really truly believe that's the single biggest thing that somebody can do, to protect themselves from the most number of attacks that are out there. Next would be, be wary of free applications. Again, if it's free on the internet, you're the product. Don't, when you see that free screensaver or that free background or the free wallpaper, free mouse cursors, like, again, they're making money off of you somehow. And oftentimes it's by tracking what you do. Yeah, that free wallpaper that you're installing, you're downloading a package to install a wallpaper on your computer. I see this all the time. Or a piece of software that manages the wallpaper for free within Windows. That's tracking what you're doing with your computer. It's collecting demographic usage information and then selling that for marketing purposes. Next is avoid oversharing. In this time and day of social media, we're all posting things out there about what we're doing and what we're eating and who we are and what's our birthdays and our friends' birthdays and saying happy birthday. Like, avoid oversharing. If that information is not out there to be exploited, again, they can't exploit it. We've seen challenge and security questions when you log into your bank account, like what was your first dog, or where were you born? These answers can be found in social media and what's public. We all just have to be aware that the internet is not going to, this information is never going to go away. It's out there. There's lots of resources that can crawl the web. That there's cached versions of websites. Even when a website gets removed from the internet, there's a cache of that website that exists somewhere. In fact, there are organizations out there that all they do is download web content and, for the purpose of when that content's removed, to still have it available. So, avoid oversharing. And then finally, again, we touched on this earlier, educate yourself and your staff. And, you're here, so we're getting educated. Education is really a part of creating a security culture within your organization. Just be aware, keep it top of mind. Some pro tips here. I'm not endorsing any particular product, of course, but I want to throw out some examples of some different password manager softwares. Bitwarden is a very popular one. I usually find that it's a kind of a more technical folks, more techie individuals, tend to use that platform. LastPass, this is a commercial one. I actually use this and I recommend it to my friends and family. This is a commercial software. It's pretty easy to use. 1Password, again, it's popular, it's commercial. Dashlane is another very popular password manager. And then finally, multi-factor soft token applications. Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, and Duo Mobile. These are all apps that you can install on your phone that when you have a password manager installed, you can go through the configuration of that password manager and enable multi-factor authentication with a software like Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator or Duo Mobile. And there's lots of walkthroughs out there on the internet. We can just go on YouTube and type in, how to install a password manager. There's going to be a million videos about how to do that and how to enable it for multi-factor authentication. So I would encourage you to check out one of these softwares or do some research and find one that suits you better. But use a password manager and then multi-factor authenticate that password management software. Those are two really good tips.
Another tip would be just think about where you are using your cell phone. And the kinds of things that you do on this now. So, I have an app for everything: investing, banking, credit cards, when my dog is getting groomed. Everything is on your mobile phone. And so when you think about Wi-Fi and free Wi-Fi, there's tons of it out there these days. And I have personally witnessed Justin do this when we've been at security conferences. We've, of course, not used it for any ill intent, just for display purposes only, because then we share that data in presentations. But it is really easy to use a very cheap device to broadcast a Wi-Fi signal that we own. So using an LTE connection and broadcast a Wi-Fi signal. But then where we get tricky is, let's say that we're at the Hyatt Regency and the name of the free Wi-Fi network is Hyatt Guest. Well, guess what we do? We display Hyatt Guest on that network that we're providing. And because your phone has a SSID that it automatically tries to reattach to if it's done it before you know it, you're using our free Wi-Fi, which means your traffic is passing through our filter. So what does that mean? That means that we can literally watch and keylog anything that we want, your passwords, which sites you're going to, etc. That's when it gets really scary. So that is more prevalent than people realize. The Starbucks around the corner, the Panera Bread, you name it. If you are on a Wi-Fi that is free, never do anything that you would want potentially compromised. Don't log into your bank account. Don't text message your street address. Like, don't do anything. If you're going to do something on your phone while on free Wi-Fi, just don't do it. Switch off the Wi-Fi, go to LTE, and do it there. That's a tip that you can share with your parents, your grandparents. That's a really common thing that we see people get goofed up by because they just trust it. It's Wi-Fi. It must be fine. But you got to be thinking about where that Wi-Fi is coming from and be vigilant about that. So that's a pro tip that you can take away today and just don't do it.
Yeah. I want to highlight one more that I didn't put here on my pro tip slide. People may have heard of the Electronic Freedom Foundation, or the EFF. They're an organization out on the web that promotes internet security and internet privacy. When you're browsing the web, a lot of these websites are tracking you. There's cookies and there's other various methods that they can use to gain information about you, where you're at geographically, targeting ads, giving you a unique ID when you go to a website so that they can track you when you come back. There's a software that the Electronic Freedom Foundation puts out, and it's free, and it's a browser add-on, meaning it's a piece of software that you can install that runs in your web browser that basically blocks websites from being able to track you. And so this software is called Privacy Badger, and it's free. It's a great add-on that works in Chrome, works in Firefox, works in Internet Explorer, but it's a really great piece of software to kind of serve to minimize your presence when you're browsing websites and minimize the website's ability to capture information about you. And it's something that I use on all my browsers, and something that I preach to people that ask me about cybersecurity is Privacy Badger by the Electronic Freedom Foundation.
And we've vetted that. So not to sound hypocritical, because when it's free, you are typically the product. But unlike cyber criminals, there are actually people who are, modern day Robin Hoods, so to speak, that will go out and create software for good reasons with good purposes behind it. And that is an example of one of them. Any other pro tips that we want to share?
I think that's it on the pro tips.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to take the next one?
Sure.
Good. There we go.
We are experiencing technical difficulties.
No, we're not. Let's see. Advance the slide. There we go.
So last but not least is always our shameless plug. Obviously, we are in the IT business to serve local businesses. It's what we do when folks have technology leadership gaps or support security needs, or even the basics, building a network and maintaining a secure environment. That's what we do for local businesses. So if you have a need or know of somebody that has a need, reach out to us, sales@360itpartners.com, or go on our website and hit contact us. We'd love to talk to you about how we could help elevate technology in your organization. So without further ado, we hope that you enjoyed this cybersecurity talk. But now it's time to jump into the questions.
All right. So I'm gonna take this if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So Deborah asked if a biometric login is more secure than passwords or passphrases. Well, I think I would say that the answer to that is debatable. And forgive me for not giving an exact answer, but I've seen trickery where you can copy somebody's fingerprint based on a gummy bear. I've seen I go to a computer security conference annually, and they do demonstrations of various common attacks, and they were showing how somebody could essentially use a gummy bear to capture your fingerprint and use that to bypass a login. So is it more secure? Biometric doesn't necessarily mean fingerprint. Biometric could be retina. Biometric could be any number of things that are based on your body. So is it more secure? I would say it's not necessarily more secure, but when you use that as a multi-factor, if you use that as a second factor in addition to your password, you're certainly going to be much more secure than you would be, if you weren't using that. Hopefully that answers the question.
SA asked, are the social media sites safe? They seem to have a lot of areas where people can find information other than just friends. And you're right, you click on, whether it's a Facebook profile or LinkedIn, there is a lot of information out there. So the first thing to that question would be for yourself, go in and look at your social media sites and make sure that you're not sharing anything that is private. Cities, former places that you've worked. If it's not LinkedIn, social sites specifically, maybe peel some of that more private personal information back. And in terms of safety, you've really got to read up on what all is enabled on some of these apps, particularly Facebook. They've got hooks into so many other sites out there.
Yes.
So you've got to really go in and let's just say it this way. Assume the defaults of any social media app are set to be as wide open as possible, meaning you're going to have to manually go back. It's just like when you sign up for something, you're automatically subscribed to all the marketing stuff. You've got to manually go back and reduce the amount of exposure. So, I would say they're probably not safe if you just go into them blindly. But if you go in there after the fact and manually peel back a lot of that additional things that are being shared, you make it more safe. But as a general rule of thumb, if you're sharing personal content on social media, then I would say that site is not safe because that information is very easily accessed by most anyone with an internet connection.
Yeah, I would second that, and I would go on to say that all of the different social media applications and sites have privacy settings, and I would encourage you all to go through any privacy settings that you might have on Instagram or Snapchat or any of the different social media outlets that are out there, because those privacy settings can be manipulated, and for some people, especially executives, you might want to keep that stuff a little bit more private. But you be the judge of what you want out there. But going back to one of the security pro tips that we talked about earlier, avoid oversharing. Again, things that are out there can be used against you. You can answer challenge questions that you have. Avoiding oversharing and locking down your privacy settings in social media is a huge part of maintaining security.
But Justin, I'm on this amazing vacation, and I want everyone to know how great of a time I'm having. The answer to that is fantastic. Wait till you're home from your vacation and then share your photos, because timing can also be a relevant thing for physical break-ins. And this is kind of off IT security, but in general with social media, if you're gone from home, wait till you're back home to then share where you've been visiting and whatnot, because you just make yourself less vulnerable.
Yeah. I see Michael asked, do you see it safer to connect a device like a laptop or an iPad to your phone and go through your cellular data connection, even though it might be using your cell phone plan data? I would say that it is absolutely more safe to do that than to use a public Wi-Fi network. I find myself doing that quite a bit. I use my Wi-Fi hotspot on my phone. All Androids and iPhones have the ability to act as a hotspot. That is to say, the cell phone itself turns into a Wi-Fi router, and you connect to the connect to the Wi-Fi of the cell phone, and then through that connection, your internet gets routed out the cell phone's internet connection. Now that's much more ideal than say using Starbucks Wi-Fi or going into your hotel and using the Wi-Fi. Might not be quite as fast, but it's definitely going to be more secure, and it's something that I personally do. I never use the hotel, free Wi-Fi in the hotel unless it's an extreme circumstance and I'm trying to stream something, and I really need that speed. But I mean, the cellular speeds that you can get today. Our office here is near Town Center, Virginia Beach, and we have 5G, which offers over 100 meg download speeds over your cell phone, which is just incredible. I mean, I'm astounded from that technology, based, coming from the days of dial-up. It's just incredible that can go through the air. But yeah, using your cell phone as a hotspot is certainly more secure than using public Wi-Fi.
And then Ms. Deborah Brown asked, speaking of security conferences, has anyone mentioned security issues with key fobs and secure spaces?
Yeah, in fact, I saw a demonstration last year where a gentleman had constructed a device that would, it was a wand, much like you might see it, when you go to a concert and they're, scanning your body. It's like a wand like that. And what he would do is he would pass it over the person's behind, and he would capture their credit card, radio frequency tagging from their credit cards. And so yeah, absolutely. Key fobs use a similar radio frequency technology, or near field communication, NFC. There's another acronym for you. But that is to say that, when a key fob is put to a door contact, the door contact pops, because that key fob contains information that, says who you are and that you can go, into the door. So yes, I have heard of speakers exploiting key fob technology in order to, gain access. And again, and that's where it's, it's important. It's multi-factor. So you're authenticating with your key fob and with your password. I think that this question is more in line with like physical security, getting into a space physically, which is also a requirement for a lot of security compliance. Is the key fob contains a unique identifier for you, so people can tell when you're coming in and going out of the building, and who you are, when you're coming in and out. But we definitely see that talked about in conferences all the time, and we've even seen examples of people exploiting that technology, in order to gain access to a building.
Yeah, in fact, there's a really neat story about Kevin Mitnick, the world's most infamous hacker, who used a key fob reader, basically, and social engineering to get all the way into the CEO of Bank of America's personal laptop in his office, simply by posing as somebody interested in an office space in that building, talking to the rental agent, who then has a key fob that's a skeleton key, ultimately getting on the same floor, hiding out in the bathrooms, scanning executives, and then coming in after hours, letting himself right into the executive's office and ultimately onto his computer, using social engineering and key fob reader. So there are issues with it, and that's where being vigilant, accurate logging, check-in, check-out processes, so that even in the instance where that key fob is used inappropriately, you have a log of who that belonged to and when they were there, so you can verify if it was actually that person or somebody impersonating them.
Absolutely. I think that was the last question here. So, we appreciate everybody's time today.
Yep, special thank you to Tasha and the team over there at ODU. We appreciate the time. And we've got one more talk coming up on February, I want to say the 17th, I believe it is. So if you get a chance to tune into that one, we'd love to see you there as well. And
I see one more question that popped in that I want to answer. I said we've got 2 more minutes here. It says, for business owners, properly training personnel would also help avoid security issues. Absolutely. We talked about that earlier. End user awareness training, security awareness training is huge. It's one of the first lines of defense, for security, is to educate people on what to look out for. Threats do change every day. And a lot of compliances require that your employees are attesting that they received security training at least annually. Excuse me. I know that HIPAA and the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement that refers to some of the NIST standards say that you need to be providing it at least annually. Certainly a good practice. And they go on to ask, are there any tips you can provide for small business owners that are effective but not costly? Well, yes, there's several different training organizations out there. Mimecast is one. Know Before is another one. That's the one that we use here for end user awareness training, and they're pretty cost effective, I would say.
Yeah, it's a really neat tool. It's kind of a fun process too, whereby the tool effectively attacks you, but obviously in a non-malicious manner, but it sends these fake emails that are easy to get tripped up on. And then you get a report back of who in your organization clicked on it, whether they downloaded the link, etc. And then it follows up and shares video training with you. So if you've got more questions about that, again, feel free to reach out to us at sales@360itpartners.com, and we could talk about how we might be able to help with that.
Also, the next meeting or the next workshop will be "Don't Go Through COVID-19 Alone. Trust Your IT Professional." It's on the 17th of February, so it's next Wednesday at 9 a.m.
Awesome.
And the registration is open. I will go ahead and put the registration link into the chat for everyone.
Awesome. Thank you guys for making time with us on a busy Monday morning. I know everyone's time is very important. Thank you for tuning in and spending some time with us. And I hope you guys have an awesome week and a wonderful day.
Thanks so much, everyone.
You're welcome.